Good afternoon. I'm very, very grateful for organizers of this conference for inviting me because it gives me the opportunity to tell you something which probably will be surprising to most of you. So I am indeed professor in the university in New York City, but since the COVID started, we kind of moved all the classes on Zoom, and it so happens that since 2020, so for the last 5.5 years, I'm actually based in Korea. Okay, so I'm local, and lots of my colleagues around the world have know it, but I keep meeting people in Korea who have no idea, because maybe we can't imagine that somebody like me would be living in Korea. But why not? I can give a whole lecture why I love Korea so much, but not today. So I'm looking forward to more interactions with local researchers, participation in your events, meeting your students, and so on and so forth. So what I'll try to do today in my half an hour is to first kind of briefly summarize my earlier work, which some of you know, but not everybody, on cultural analytics, and then can make a bridge to generative artificial intelligence, which is the subject of my most recent book. And as you'll see, I will claim that both kind of cultural analytics and actually digital humanities as well, on the one hand, and generative AI kind of share certain common limitation, which comes from the use of big data, statistics, and data science. So another reason why I'm kind of happy to give this talk today is actually I got this idea for cultural analytics exactly 20 years ago. It was November of 2005. It was kind of a few years before social media became really popular around the world, but the internet, of course, already existed, and all the museums, universities, design studios, and so on had already websites. So I got this idea that what we can do is we can create software, right, which will visit hundreds of thousands or millions of these websites, grab announcements of conferences, grab announcements of exhibitions, descriptions of projects, right, and then use data analysis to analyze cultural trends and see how these cultural trends emerge, spread, and so on and so forth. And I think actually when I come up with this idea, I anticipated by about 3 to 4 years the emergence of exactly this kind of analysis in the industry, right? So today, let's say Meta, right, does this analysis with Instagram. So the machines analyze, all the posts of 3 billion users, and they kind of recommend, right, what posts you should look at, what other people you should follow, and so on, right? Around 2009, 2010, you have emergence of new type of software called social media monitoring, right? And today used very widely. So any company, like $30, $40 a month. So companies, right, subscribe to the software, and you can put, the concept of the name of a company, the name of a brand, and it will show you all the conversations, right, related to the topic around the world. So the industry kind of actually is doing cultural analytics at large scale, but of course we're interested in particular questions, right, related to kind of making money, brands, marketing, advertising. So we're not really doing, right, let's say more humanistic cultural analytics, which is what I imagined. So this is a homepage of our lab. And as you can see, in trying to describe it, I could have talked about all the museums which digitize their artifacts, right, their collections, but I wanted to focus on something else, which to me actually differentiates cultural analytics, right, from digital humanities. Right? So digital humanities, especially 20 years ago, was completely focused on text analysis, right, and lots of usually literary text. I think today is a bit broader, but as you can see from a program of this conference, this kind of focus on text still remains. Because I came from art, right, from painting, from design, from new media, I was interested more in images, but also I was interested to create methods which will allow us to analyze contemporary kind of trends across contemporary culture, right? Both a culture created by professionals, but also kind of user-generated culture, what today we call content economy, were hundreds of millions of users, right, creating content for social media. So today, people around the world create, share, and interact with billions of new digital artifacts every day. We need new methods for seeing culture at its new scale and velocity. So another thing I should mention is this idea of cultural analytics came to me because in 2005, I was at the opening of a new large research institute on the campus of my university, University of California, San Diego, where some researchers were creating these kind of huge visualization walls, right? So you see here like image taken a few years later, me and people from my lab, and we're not looking at a big painting, we're not looking at a big poster, we're actually looking at a wall made from 70, 30-inch screens, and behind it are PCs. So basically, essentially, it's a visual supercomputer, and we developed software which would allow us to put thousands of images and then manipulate them in different times, in real time. So basically, we created a kind of tool for analyzing trends and patterns in image collections, right, in real time. And again, this is kind of very different from a kind of text-based analysis. So as you can see, 20 years ago, right, when I thought about this idea, my vision was incredibly ambitious and perhaps very, very utopian. So we started by kind of doing mock-ups, right, of potential interfaces of how the system would look like, right? So these are interfaces. You have network view on top. You have a long tail of culture in the middle. You have, let's say, connections between different kind of themes, right, in contemporary global culture. And then we started by kind of putting these mock-ups on this wall, right, where we're not interactive. There was nothing behind. We were taking pictures as a way to kind of present our vision. And then we started to apply for grants and try to collaborate with scientists at our university to actually build such a system. So I will show very briefly just a few examples of the work we actually did. Again, it's familiar to some of you. So this is visualization of all the covers of Time magazine. So about over 5,000 covers published between 1923 and 2009 when we did download. And the idea, right, was to create visualizations which don't reduce the data to kind of points and lines, right? Essentially kind of throwing away most information, but to actually create visualizations from small thumbnails of the actual images in the data set, because this way, right, we can kind of zoom in and see what the content is and see more trends, right? And then we can zoom out and see more patterns. Like I'm not going to describe all the 14 patterns I found here because it'll be in our lecture, but here you can see some kind of patterns, changes in color. You can also see how things get more saturated. If you look more closely, you will see changes in kind of design strategies, and so on and so forth. Right? And then this is like another view of the same data set, right? So what's important is that actually here, okay. No, it's okay. Yeah, so here we're not measuring anything. We're not using computer vision. We're simply kind of visualizing these images in a particular layout. And then, of course, because I had background in computer vision, I realized that we can also apply various measurements to images and videos and use these measurements to plot the data, right? So here on the x-axis you have time, 23 to 2009, and on the y-axis, the position of each cover is determined by its average saturation, which is the color intensity, right? And again, And what you see here is this particular visualization reveals kind of interesting patterns in changing variability, right? So the most desaturated covers, kind of black and white at the bottom, the most saturated one on top, and you can see how like this spike, like there's this larger range, which is around 1960s, even 1970s, right? It goes smaller and then it goes bigger again. So again, here you can actually see kind of statistical patterns, but you don't have to know actually any statistics because they're revealed by visualizations. Okay? And then we're slowly kind of moving towards bigger and bigger data. So one of the projects we did is we worked on manga. So we downloaded all the most popular manga, which are translated in our languages, 883 titles, 1 million pages. And here's visualization of this 1 million pages, where you have two visual properties, one on the x, one on the y. And this is more traditional visualization, where you visualize each page as a point, And you do see, the particular distribution, right, where it's kind of, more manga in the center, but you have no idea what this manga is, right? So this is the same visualization where, we actually replace points by this manga covers, and you actually see 1 million manga, but of course, from this distance, you don't know what we are. This is like a close-up, and you can zoom in and out, and so on. The whole visualization is 40,000 by 40,000 pixels, and to me, like what was interesting about it is I expected to see, various clusters, right? I expected to see various kind of stylistic areas, and actually we are in manga, but at least according to the 2 dimensions which we use here to sort these images, there's a complete continuity, right? So I realized that using big data can potentially kind of help us to question our assumptions, right, about the culture. If we look at the culture on large scale, such as that there are different styles, there are different aesthetics, sometimes we are, and sometimes actually culture realizes every single possibility. And then eventually we kind of move towards social media. This was like the very first visualization of Instagram we did in 2012. So this is, I think, 50,000 images shared over a few days in Bangkok, visualized using different layout. I think you have brightness on the, which is distance to the radius, and you have saturation, which goes around the color. We also did visualization related to content, but at this, because you're sitting kind of far, right, and at this scale, I'm decided to show just a few examples of visualizations which focus more on visual features, because then you can very clearly see different patterns. And this is a comparison, right, of people sharing photos on Instagram in 2013, 50,000 photos in New York on the top and 50,000 photos in Tokyo at the bottom, right, over a few days. And you can see how it gets dark at night, but doesn't get completely dark, and it gets lighter during the day. You also see that people sharing more photos in New York, right, because there are few with waves, so each day is longer. And if you zoom in, you start seeing like very interesting sort of patterns related to the content. So you have lots of kind of brownish, kind of yellowish food in Tokyo and other things in New York and so on and so forth. So eventually, I stopped doing the projects and I kind of published this book in 2020, Cultural Analytics. And I just want to kind of highlight a couple of ideas. Okay, so this we talked about. Okay, this is fine. Well, so I basically had in the book 12 research challenges, and I think we are very, very ambitious, and it's kind of utopian. And I mean, I don't think that 5 years later today or 5 years from now will be realized. So they're kind of impossible challenges. At least I don't think that anybody was able to actually do it. But maybe some people do. So how can work with big cultural data help us to question our stereotypes, assumptions, concepts, and existing knowledge about culture, right? So that's all fine. In our challenge is number 5, right? So most of digital humanities, I think maybe all digital humanities, is using it as data, like already kind of published, kind of static, right? Cultural artifacts like newspaper articles, novels, and so on. But of course, today we live in the era of interactive digital culture, right? People play video games, they interact with AI, we interact, we sort of chat on messengers. And I don't think there was like much work, or maybe any work, in DH or cultural analytics, which actually deals with how to analyze this interactive culture, which actually characterizes our time. And then number 6, is also, I think, very ambitious and very, very difficult. What theoretical concepts and models do we need to deal with mega scale and velocity of user-generated content and user interactions online? Right? Our 20th century theoretical concepts in humanities are enough, or do we actually need to create new concepts? And what I realized after many years is actually when we start doing DH or cultural analytics, in certain sense, this quantitative approach actually prevents us, makes it more difficult to come up with new theoretical ideas, right? Because we kind of take for granted existing units of analysis: text, offer, sentence, and word, right? So in a way, using digital methods kind of solidifies our existing thinking, right? And then these last ones, right? Can we describe cultures both objectively and as we perceive them, as statistical distributions and combinations of elements, themes, and strategies, right? Kind of atomistic approach, right? Or is culture about gestalts, not reducible to their parts, right? If the answer to the second question is yes, this may make cultural analytics impossible, right? Because when we do this quantitative analysis, we basically extract features. They can be words, they can be topics, they can be some compositional patterns, some aesthetic patterns, right? And then we kind of assume that, the cultural wholes, right, the cultural artifacts are kind of made from combination of these features. So by looking at these features, we get some insight into the culture, but maybe that's not how human perception and cognition works, right? Maybe culture is about gestalts. So maybe if you're analyzing a film, it's not about average shot length, it's not about cinematography. It's everything kind of working together in a way where you can't really take it into parts. And then finally, number 12 is maybe the biggest challenge and kind of my favorite idea. So what I realized is that both data, statistics and data science operate by reduction and aggregation, right? You reduce data to distributions. When you do cluster analysis, you reduce data to clusters, right? And in fact, one of the definitions of statistics is the science of aggregation and summarization of data. And of course, every summary, right, condenses some information, throws away other information, right? So the biggest kind of issue in DH and cultural analytics, and as we'll see in AI also, is that you kind of throw away lots of information, and perhaps you throw away kind of unique points because you're trying to aggregate and summarize your data in the best possible way to see the pattern. But the pattern by default is something which is repeated, which means that if you kind of look at reality, look at culture from a statistical point of view, it actually makes it very difficult to impossible for you to see actually unique things, right? So is reduction a wrong approach? If contemporary authors, right, if both modernism and contemporary period want to create unique artifacts and experiences that can be duplicated, right? Everybody wants to create something unique today in a very modernist fashion. Will we inevitably miss true uniqueness in our quest to track larger trends? So when in 22, right, like many others, I was super excited about big progress in generative artificial intelligence, and I started using AI image tools, kind of creating artworks, and also publishing my insights online. And together with my colleague from Europe, we kind of published this book online. We completed it in September of last year. I'm happy to tell you that now it's being translated into the Spanish translation just came out last week. I also have a contract for Korean translation, Chinese, Italian, and Japanese. The whole book is online, so I don't have to tell you about it. You can kind of download or use AI to summarize it. But I just want to use my last 7 minutes to tell you what I was going to tell you, what I promised, which is what is the connection between cultural analytics and AI? Well, the first connection is that both can be seen as effects of a web, right? So in 1993, the web starts exploding. We create kind of duplicate, right? Like a digital double of our society. We create digital culture, right? By trillions of web pages, trillions of images. And this proliferation of digital culture has multiple effects. So just to name three, the first effect is the switch from directories and hierarchical knowledge systems to search in the 90s, right? Because there is so many objects out there, right? You can't analyze, there is no time to analyze them hierarchically in categories, so we just use the search. Another effect was emergence of data science as a new field around 2009, the realization that there's lots of big data in our society, in companies, in scientific experiments, but of course, the prime example of big data was the social media, right? The industry, the economics, the society realized that we can combine the trends, right? So data science becomes the new discipline, and data science at the time was described as dealing with data at such a scale that traditional statistical methods are not enough. And then my own little paradigm of cultural analytics was kind of part of the same wave, right? Realizing that there is so much culture now in digital form that we can start systematically analyzing kind of cultural patterns across these data sets. And then yet another effect of the web is emergence of generative AI, right? Because what generative AI is doing, right, is these models are being trained on trillions of web pages, they're being trained on billions of images, and then we kind of learn, right, also the patterns. So in a way, we're doing kind of cultural analytics, but of course, these patterns, right, are impossible to actually reveal because they're hidden in a way it's our model, and the networks are trained not to give you these patterns, which is what I would like, right, as a kind of humanities person, but we're trained to generate new artifacts with the same statistical properties as in the data, right? So that's one connection. Both cultural analytics and artificial intelligence and a number of other developments are part of the same kind of movement, which are effects of the web. And generative AI is not the last effect, right? We'll see more effects, we'll see new disciplines, we'll see new type of knowledge, new type of instruments emerging, I think, in years to come out of this unprecedented accumulation of cultural and social data on the web, right? So that's, oh, sorry, I didn't want to go. So that's one thing, right? And then there's like another sort of connection, which is about limitation, right? So as I claimed, when we analyze large cultural data quantitatively, we use statistical tools, and statistical tools are designed to do reduction, and we can miss kind of unique works, and we can also miss like small kind of subcultures, right? Small islands of cultural content. And actually something similar happens with AI, right? Because AI trained on these huge cultural data sets, whatever patterns dominating these culture sets, right, is being learned by the model. So while AI models are very good in generating like kind of text or ideas or images or videos using familiar genres, right, using kind of type of content strategies or aesthetics, which are very common, when you try to generate something very unique, right, they kind of break down, right, because we're not trained for this uniqueness. So this actually comes from a book, right? So what happens when you actually try to generate something non-existent, rare, or unfamiliar to them? Something which hasn't been done before, right? Something which doesn't exist on the web. Well, they can do it, but not perfectly. So the quality of generated results becomes lower, aesthetics are inferior, mistakes appear, and generated scene is not coherent. Or the tools substitute the content and aesthetics you want with more commonplace alternatives. So you describe something you want, something very subtle, something very unique, and when you get something, both when you use like AI to generate text and when you use them to generate images or video, something which is more or less fits what you wanted, except it's in more commonplace aesthetics, it's more commonplace ideas, right? So, because again, this is what it knows. You get a coherent scene, figures and faces with correct anatomy, right? Interesting composition, but the image is composed of more generic cliché elements. The aesthetic parameters are shifted towards more common values. And I'll finish in 2 minutes. So over the last 3 years, I created tens of thousands of images. I had exhibitions. I had 2 personal exhibitions. With this work, one was in Seoul. And I've been kind of struggling and using my 50 years of experience in visual art to try to figure out how I can tweak with AI tools such as Midjourney, right? Now we have Nano Banana and so on, to make this very unique kind of subtle things, right? Which is not what I'm designed for. And more or less, I think often I was able to do it, but I had to pay the price, right? So for example, like I wanted to generate this image, right? Of this kind of socialist kind of, right, kind of modernist building. And then there's a cloud, right, which is on top of this building, and the cloud is connected to a building by kind of ropes. And after tons and tons of trying, right, this is the best I was able to do. Right? You have a strange wires, and they're not even connecting correctly, because this is just not something which I think was ever like, maybe there are a few images like this, but probably none. Right? So you try to make something which is completely non-existent, and at the same time not in cliché aesthetics, and you get mistakes. Right? And then this is from another image series called Drawing Rooms. So here, I can't describe the whole process of how I do it. It's not just writing prompts. It would be like another lecture. But basically, I really like, right, like this kind of background, how you have these objects, right, which are not completely merged, kind of broken, right, with kind of endless still life. But the price I had to pay is that the figures, right, also have anatomical mistakes, which is maybe okay. But as you look at the faces, right, the faces are very generic, kind of beautiful, right, kind of faces. So the faces kind of come, right, more from popular culture, while only some things are unique. And then, this is another image which I really like. So I think here I was able to get something where like I'm satisfied with everything. Again, the price I had to pay is that if you look at this structure, they're kind of broken, right? You see how the top pole doesn't connect properly, but I don't mind, right, this brokenness, because I kind of use this surrealist, modernist aesthetics, where the world I want to create is not perfect, so I basically had to accept that this is the price I have to pay and do it. So again, to finish, I'm actually on time, which is amazing, although I probably was speaking like way too fast. So both cultural analytics, NDH, and artificial intelligence can be seen as effects of the same kind of process. Our society trying to explore how we can use big data, specifically data on the web, and at the same time, right, we both have these limitations, but basically behind them is statistics and data mining, machine learning, and both statistics from 18th century onward and machine learning of 20th, 21st century are very good tools for aggregating data, for extracting general patterns, but they're not really very good tools to deal with like small islands of content, small islands of uniqueness, or like unique cultural points. And I think to me, this kind of really limits potential usefulness of this approach to culture. Thank you so much.